I always like to point out that the Richmond Shipyard cars, which were actually built for the New York Elevated system back in late 1880s, and they were originally pulled behind small steam locomotives. Well, if you go into the interior and look around, it's fairly Spartan in many respects, but there was still wood carving on the walls, and even for the common person, there was a touch of class. There was pride in what they did, and if you look at pictures from all those days, I mean, all the ridership the men were all wearing hats and coats and ties and stuff like that. You wouldn't dare dream of seeing people running around in jeans and cutoffs and t-shirts on the trains back in those days. It was a different era. But even for the common person, there was a sense of style. Now, because of the lack of respect a lot of people have for transit systems and the equipment, they've had to, I'll say, sanitize the stuff. And what I mean by that is it's all very utilitarian. There's nothing super duper fancy about them or like with a touch of class. It's all very functional, easy to clean, or hopefully easy to clean, and things like that. Versus if you look at the older cars, they would not have been that particularly easy to clean the way that you would need to do things now.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. I don't know about other people, but okay. Yeah, that was a lot of information, which is really useful. Um, so my fourth question is, what drives you to keep preserving railroad history?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's something we had to reflect upon during the museum assessment program, or what they call MAP. And a lot of the pure museums thought we should just store the equipment and just lock it up and preserve it as is, which is what you would typically do for artworks and statues and things like that. I think for us, we're preserving two things. We're preserving the artifacts like we do in the archives for research purposes and digging into the past and looking at the pictures and things like that. But the other thing we're preserving is the experience of the ride, so that you get a chance to experience what this old equipment was like to ride. Why is it that you go to some of these places that have working steam locomotives, people always get a kick out of it because of the experience of it, or riding on a horse and buggy and things like that. It's so different from what we're used to racing around in our cars. And even just the difference between riding in BART versus riding one of the older pieces of equipment, it's preserving a sense of where we've been. And I think it's important to root yourself in where we've been so that we can hopefully try to avoid the mistakes made in the past by being informed about them, but always bringing them into the future. So what motivates me or drives me to do this? It's helping preserve that experience. On a personal level, it kind of brings back the memories of when I used to ride a lot of the older equipment that was somewhat similar in a way to what we have. If I were able to get you back to the Illinois Museum, you'd be able to experience the actual equipment I used to ride as a kid when I would visit my grandparents. And there was one particular line, the North Shore line, that ran between Chicago and Milwaukee, that the cars would get up to 80 miles an hour or faster. And you could sit up on what they call the Electroliner. They had a rail fan seat right up front, just like the bridge units. That's quite an experience when you're racing through the countryside at close to 90 miles an hour. And then when you enter the elevated structure, it's very, very different looking from what BART has now. And there are sections of the elevated system that were built in the 1890s in Chicago. Of course, they've had to rebuild it because a lot of the ironwork, just rusted out and stuff. But it's been replaced. But a lot of the structure and how they built things is still the same. And Muni, even though there are new lines and new extensions, if you look at some of the older lines, like the J Church line in particular,